Gracias, Alfonso. Mira, buenos días a todo el mundo. Aquí estamos con unas intervenciones breves de parte de lo que estamos llamando la invasión anglosajona aquí en el Congreso. Se, me recuerda un poco a los Beatles en Estados Unidos. Me parece que hay un poco de movimiento aquí. Y energía. Mira, esta charla es totalmente en inglés, salvo esta pequeña introducción. Es un gran placer. Muchas gracias por estar acá. Durante las intervenciones, si hay alguien que quiera hacer una intervención en español, para que yo la traduzco a los demás aquí, se puede. Pero si lo haga, hay que hablar despacito y brevemente para que lo pueda captar de alguna manera más o menos adecuado. Entonces, I'm going to switch in English. I will welcome you all today and thank you very much for coming. I was thinking to myself as I was coming along that we're starting 1 hour earlier than yesterday and also following in the wake of a very late dinner. So we have a little bit of some challenges that will have to be dealt with, but here we are, fresh and ready to go. My name's Michael Hoechsmann. I'm a professor in a small university in Canada called Lakehead, and some of you know me. I've been in a few of the conferences here in Spain, and always very happy to be listening in to your discussions. And I believe that if this session goes well, the session is a spontaneous speaker session. So we do have some preparation that we've done in advance, but we're also expecting interaction. So we're here to have a conversation to some extent. You folks know David Buckingham, and yesterday he had an opportunity to speak, and so to some extent we will follow up on that. We create now a condition for better dialogue, but also we have also these other very interesting people that all have been given free rein to raise whatever issue it is that they consider to be sort of important and urgent today. So I know that we're usually to be kept to 3 minutes, and I'm probably already ruining that trend. We're going to start with brief self-introductions, starting on my left, John Potter.
Thanks very much, Michael. My name is John Potter, and I work at University College London Institute of Education, and I work in a research unit called the DARE Collaborative Digital Arts Research and Education, which is also inside the Knowledge Lab. So lots of little organizations inside organizations. And my background is in media education research, specifically as it relates to younger learners. So I'm reader in media and education there. Is that enough for now?
Good morning. My name is Belinha S, Abreu, and I am from the United States. I am a professor at Sacred Heart University in Connecticut and also a practitioner at a public school in Connecticut. So my background in media education actually stems from my own experience in working in broadcasting and then taking those experiences and putting them into my teaching experiences. And my research has been in the area of middle school and high school students and their use of mobile technologies. Before that, just their general use of media and its applicability to their lives.
My name is Kathleen Tyner. I'm from the University of Texas in Austin, Texas, where I'm a professor and teach a media literacy class, a children in media class. My background in the 1980s, I started working with media education. I have a background in news. I worked for the San Francisco Chronicle as a news producer in San Francisco in the 80s and early 90s. And so I continue to try to fuse production and media analysis and critical thinking. I started a nonprofit years ago to help with teacher education and training, and now I'm veering more, I think, towards the media arts and production. So I'm very happy to be here in Spain. I've been here many times, and Glad to have a conversation with you.
Okay, thanks. I'm David Buckingham. I have been a teacher educator, a researcher, to some extent an activist in media education for a very long time. I have recently retired. I was a professor, in fact, at John's institution, University of London, and then I moved to Loughborough University in the UK, which has a strong media social science profile. But now I'm free. So I go around and do talks, and I write, and I have a nice time, and I don't do anything I don't want to do.
Thanks, everyone. And listening to the others, I realized that I should have probably mentioned a little bit about my connections to media literacy, or the world of the non-formal ed. I was the director of education of a news agency for youth called Young People's Press for a period around the beginning of the century. And presently I'm one of the members of the board of Media Smarts, Canada's Centre for Digital and Media Literacy, which is a resource organization. But we're going to kick off with John.
Thanks. It's kind of daunting to have to go first. And I do, in my day job, do lots of things that I don't really want to do, so I'm sitting here very envious of David. Okay, so my 3 minutes, I guess, starts now, and what I'd like to talk about is, I see that the brief is to talk about media education in a post-truth world. I'd like to actually address media education more globally than that, and I'd like to make a pitch for media education to begin in the earliest years of education. I don't think it's something that we can leave until it's too late. I also don't think it's something that we should be looking at from a top-down model. So we shouldn't be starting with what we think people ought to know at an older age and then kind of diluting it a little bit down to younger children. I think that as media educators, we should be working with the popular cultural influences that children bring with them into the classroom, breaking down the divide, and also working with what they already know, which is not the same as not taking them anywhere else, but it means having a view of education and of learning that believes that young people, very young people, bring funds of knowledge with them. That's a key phrase, I guess. And that we should be working with that. And speaking to somebody that I'm working with quite closely at the moment, Carrie Bazalgette, whose work that you probably know, she was advocating for that for a number of years. So it's about having a view of learning that starts from the very earliest years, and knowing that young children know that they are entering a system of meaning making, and it's about making that obvious to them. So one of the earliest activities in the Developing Media Literacy Pack that David and others worked on a few years ago is about starting with young children and othering the media first, because they're swimming in this every day, making them aware of those kinds of messages, but working with what they bring through the door of the classroom with them, or into the play area, wherever they are. I think it's a fact that we consistently underestimate what very young children are capable of understanding and learning and knowing about how meaning is made. I also think it's not a good idea to restrict this to a vision of print literacy alone, but to think about an enlarged vision of what literacy could be. Because to focus on print is important, but it's unambitious in 2017. So we need more ambition for our younger learners. So that's my pitch.
So I will take on a little bit of a different perspective, which is that in the United States, the complication of education is in part that we are so large, and everything in the United States is state-driven in terms of education. Even though we may have a national policy, when it comes to things, it's still up to the states to decide how that actually gets infused into the schools. And so that means that in many cases, media education doesn't exist, or if it does exist, it's in pockets. And that's been true for many, many years. I think one of the things that has happened because of the whole idea of this fake news epidemic, which, by the way, I'm not really crazy about the term fake news. I do think it's a distraction from the work that we do in media literacy education, and certainly a distraction from critical thinking skills and all these other important skills that I think are much more vital than having the term fake news thrown around. Having said that, I also think that fake news has given us another entry point into having better and bigger discussions about how we should employ media literacy education in schools. And that's a greater conversation that's happening in the United States. Certainly, one of the bigger issues that we face is that with the testing that has permeated our schools, we have literally been left with students who learn to the test. And certainly don't know how to broaden their thinking, have lost creative thinking skills, certainly have lost critical thinking skills. And so getting that back in place would certainly help, I think, in this time and era where news and media and messages and so forth are sort of blurred together so that we don't know how to distinguish them. I had a quote that was sent to me that I just wanted to mention, and it's Marshall McLuhan, which many of you know. A point of view can be a dangerous luxury when substitute for insight and understanding, and I think that is really poignant at this time when there is so much confusion about what we should be doing in education and how we should go about doing it. I'll leave you with that.
Excellent. Thank you. We now have a moment where someone from the floor could speak. It's not necessary to ask questions of us. You can also just make an intervention. Do we have any volunteer that would be willing to say a word? I'm sure the wine over dinner last night left a nice sedative effect. Well, we're going to follow exactly on the lead of the panel from yesterday, which is then to carry on. We'll push through so that we've managed to hear from everyone before the floor starts to get involved. So, Kathleen.
Is it on?
Yep.
Okay. Those of you who work in public education know that the problems are bigger than media education. We have some systemic problems and confusion around the whole system, so we have to think systemically and think about what we really want to do with free public education moving forward. For me, literacy has always been embedded, so I think of media literacy as literacy, basically, only with a few changes in the digital world, and those kinds of changes. It's interdisciplinary, it's cross-disciplinary, it's a basic foundation. It's just assumed it's a basic foundation. Of course, the problem is we don't agree what literacy is as a definition, but that's okay. We move forward with this. It's an analysis, it's reading and writing written in a digital world. And given that, I agree with John that this should start much, much earlier. And if our aims and purposes are civic participation and understanding of digital society, then of course I think that this starts by infusing some research and dialogue skills into the curriculum very, very early so that people understand what evidence means, what's credible evidence, how to have a reasonable dialogue with someone you might disagree with and use evidence. That doesn't have to wait till high school, and probably shouldn't. I also have this thing lately where I keep thinking we're in a global culture and we definitely need more cultural competency, but many people have an opportunity to work locally. So I want to think more on a local level about what we can do in our own communities to advance this, and in small and large ways for children to learn to be active in their communities, whether it's with a community garden or changing their school cafeteria plan or something small where they learn to take risk and have a voice and keep moving through the use of media, responsible use of media and digital media, and analyzing the media that's out there. So starting a lot earlier and providing opportunities for dialogue in a very divided society right now in the United States, and also having our voices heard about what we really want for free public education.
Okay, I had a long talk yesterday about the whole fake news issue and so on, and post-truth. So I think I'm not going to say anything about that. I think what I want to put on the table is a sense that the big challenge for media educators right now is what we do with technology, and how we respond to technological change, and particularly the push towards the technologization of education. As I said, I've been doing this for a long time, and I have been involved in a struggle which still continues to put media literacy education in the curriculum. It's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Actually, this year it's felt more like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I think we're going backwards. So the struggle is continuing. Meanwhile, we have seen technology, ICT, information communication technology, as it's often called in the UK. We have been overtaken by technology. Technology has a much more privileged place in the curriculum. And I think media educators have been slightly wrong-footed by this. I think we've not been clear about really how we should respond to what has been a big push from policy and also from commercial companies, technology companies who see education as a market. And we've partly, I think, been seduced by some of that. We've actually bought some of the arguments about the wonders of technology, the benefits of technology. We've particularly, I would say, bought the argument that technology makes possible a whole new level of creativity for kids in creating media. Now, I don't want to deny that, but I do think the question now is what has happened to the critical edge that media literacy education can bring to that. And the thing I'm really trying to work on now, and in a way, fake news or that whole discussion is just one aspect of a broader problem, which is what do we do about technology, and particularly what do we do about social media? Are the approaches that we've developed for older media going to be applicable to social media? I very much think they are. I think we can use our concepts and ideas and also a lot of the pedagogy that was developed around film and television and print media to address social media. But I think that's the next project, that's the next challenge that we face.
I believe I just heard David quoting Juana la Cubana, un paso para adelante, dos para atrás, pero con ganas. David, I was just saying that I think I just heard you quoting quite a well-known Spanish language song called Juana la Cubana, where they talk about 1 step forward and 2 backwards, but with desire. It's a very well-known song, so I had to make that reference.
Well, I won't sing it for you.
No. I think it's some instructions for how to dance some of these complicated moves. So, okay, we have some emerging themes here. We could try to start bringing them together, but I wonder, is there an intervention from the floor? Here we go, Carol, and this is a Canadian participant. Oh, we need the microphone. Yeah. Not yet. You get to sing Juana la Cubana.
Hello? Yes. It occurred to me when, I'm getting this feedback now, when David was speaking that it was easier. The media literacy questions were easier when we dealt mostly with content. We were dealing with content, advertising, television programs, and so forth. It's easy to talk about gender representations, cultural representations when you're only talking about the content. But Kathleen yesterday reminded us of Marshall McLuhan and the medium is the message, and now David is saying that we're behind because technology has taken over. Well, that's the tool. Now, we're not used to deconstructing tools in media education, and so I think that we ought to do a better job of developing curriculum around that. And then maybe we can start to merge the old with some new, new questions and new curriculum.
Good, thank you. And we have a second intervention, Jordi, before we come back.
So should I sing now that pasas adelante? No, just very quickly, just a thought about, before working at the UN, I worked actually for over 10 years at New York City public school system, working on media and information literacy. At the time we called it media education, and but was also on the practice actually. So my workshops and my practice were actually with young people doing videos, and starting with kindergarten actually. I did videos with kindergarten. I was connected with the curriculum. The kindergarten curriculum is like your community. So suddenly I introduced the idea of like a media community within the idea of community. But what I want to bring about is that, although at the time there was not social media, by producing media, I always brought the topics of responsibility and ethics. And I think those are kind of the elements that probably we should bring into the new social media aspects. You know, the responsibility that you have as a media producer and the ethical aspect that you need to bring when you do social media. Just something for thought.
Okay, panel, does anybody jump in? Yeah, sure.
Do you mind? Okay. I guess one of the things that I'm going to say is that I think one of the issues I have with the whole technology piece, and I agree with David about how policymakers understand technology, and that's why I think they understand the digital citizenship component, because they understand, actually understand that they don't understand the technology is what I'm going to say. They have the fear surrounding it. We certainly have the issues of bullying. That also comes into play. And so those are things that policymakers can grasp because they can connect it to their children, their grandchildren, and so forth. They don't tend to grasp, I think, some of the bigger picture pieces of it. And I also think one of the issues that I see quite often is that there's an assumption that students are creating using technology. And I think it's a smaller pocket than people realize. I tend to see a lot of students who are on social media, but that doesn't mean they're creating. They're just using it to interact with their friends and to connect with other people. They are not developing videos. They're not doing those pieces. The struggle really becomes, in some respects, that they actually are moving up with less technology skills, less ability to create than people expect. And so teachers, especially in the area that I work in, end up coming across students who they expect have more knowledge, and then find out that unless they're doing some practical thing like social networking or gaming, they're not really that involved. And so unless it's actually for a club or they're engaged by developing in a different way, they're not actually creating, which I think is an unfortunate aspect of this piece.
Could I? Oh.
I think another issue is that they don't understand the various contexts of social media, and they're very involved in it, but they don't understand the business model. They don't understand that they're contributing to the market sector. They don't understand that their data is being monetized. They don't understand why Facebook has the share price on the stock market. They don't understand how they need a website if they want to do any kind of, if they want to sell their Girl Scout cookies. They don't understand, you know, these sorts of economic contexts for social media networks and businesses and business models. And I think many of us don't. So things like big data, things like, I don't like to put words on literacy, but things like financial understanding, or financial literacy, some people call it. I think that that's just one of the many contexts, and I do believe that media education is focused on the cultural, social context, and if we could broaden a little bit to more of the legal and financial, I think it gives a lot more insight into how you're being used to line somebody's pockets and what you're paying to get access to social networks.
Okay, I just wanted to respond to Carol's point because I think it's a really important point. It's something has gone on in my brain that's connected things. I mean, what you're saying is, in a way, old style media literacy was about content, or I guess I would say perhaps more it was about objects. It was about the media as a collection of objects, texts, yes? Whereas new media literacy has to be about the platform, the technology, the tool. I'm not sure about the word tool. It's about the shift in a way is from a view of this as media as objects to mediation as a process, yes? Okay, an environment would be another way of looking at it. Now I think in a way, you see, old media literacy used to be very comfortable with text, yes? Because actually certainly in the UK, most media teachers are English teachers. They're used to teaching literature. They're trained in the study of literature. They're very comfortable in analysing text. When it comes to asking some of the bigger social questions about representation, they're okay with that. When it comes to the economic questions or the legal issues, it's much harder. When it comes to really the whole question of media as process, how meaning is made and distributed, you know, in a social context, that's much, much harder. Now, the point in a way is that with this new media environment, we've really got to go down that road. We can't look at these things. I mean, texts are still there, yes? What is YouTube? It's a collection of texts, yes? But actually, if we're really going to understand what's going on there, we need to look much more and much more confidently and systematically at these other processes, yes? And particularly, I agree, the economic dimension of this is crucial, and I think it's a dimension that most consumers, most users, don't really understand.
The panel is creating its own rebellion, so we'll carry on here.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I was just going to say that if you take that, David's approach, but bring it back down to what I was talking about before, which is what happens when a young child goes into a nursery or a primary school. They already know that media is part of a system of meaning making because they've been enjoying watching a cartoon just before they come to school, etc. They walk through the door and they encounter a curriculum that in many countries devalues that experience, and the door starts to close on understanding how messages are made from quite an early age, actually, and privileging some of the more the arcane and older forms of literacy. Of course, print is important. I have to keep saying that. So my argument would be that you need to start some of this about how messages are made and then what happens to them much earlier, because I think children know that media creates messages. They make pictures of themselves, their parents, their families, and then where do they go next? These are the kinds of conversations that we can have, and they kind of sediment some of the things that you can take up later on when you start talking about institutions and about platforms. And you don't need, I haven't used the T word in anything that I've said so far. This is not about technology. It's about literacy, it's about culture, it's about the way we live together, and it's about how meanings circulate, who makes them, who sells them, who receives them, and that's what we should be starting with younger children. The technology will change tomorrow, so let's not be fixated on that. We're fixated on messages, how people make and share meaning.
I'm going to go to the floor first, and you guys seem to operate in group of 4, so once we've had another intervention, we'll come back to you. That's right. So would anybody else like to offer a point of view, ask a question? Another U.S. voice, Tessa Jules. Can speak.
Yes. Well, it strikes me, after hearing Carol's comment, David's, Kathleen's, all of you, John, Belina, that in a sense we're moving to a new stage where the text is a representation of something very different than what we've seen it in the past. Because it's not just a representation of the message in the text, it also is a representation of the technology. and the means of distribution and how we make meaning. But beyond that, it really comes down to the economic motivation behind the text in many cases, or the political motivation, in that an example was given to me recently, which I've been thinking about a lot, because it's the idea that, you know, when we look at a car, in the past we would have said, oh, well, you know, it's a car, it takes me places. But now the car companies are looking at a car as a data collection machine. And that's a very different representation of what a car actually is today. And so our entire relationship to media has changed. And we're not just an audience that a message is being sent to, but we're definitely participants, we're the product, we're the data, we're the people who are providing all of that data. And so we have a very different interest in what's being used in terms of our own representation, our own property, our own data.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yep, there's one. Carlos Rodriguez Hoyos. We're running out of people that I know out there, so beware. I won't know people's names.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in Spanish. Sorry, Michael. Voy a hablar en español. ¿Cuál es el papel que puede o debe tener la educación mediática para luchar contra el colonialismo cultural en este momento? ¿Te repito? El papel que puede o debe tener la educación mediática para luchar contra el colonialismo cultural.
Ah, sí. So what could be the
Media literacy role to cultural imperialism?
the role of media education in relation to cultural imperialism, so marginalization? Kathleen?
Well, again, that's not going to happen overnight. First of all, I think that people do have to understand the technology. I disagree a little bit that it is about message, but I call it the tyranny of the narrative, because the narratives and the storytelling are our comfort zone, the messaging. So when you think about cultural imperialization, it is not only through the messaging, it's also through the art. And I think that we've marginalized the arts to the extent that it's dangerous. And the arts are a place, whether it's Banksy or other kinds of Weiwei, the arts are a way for people to come in a more subtle and not so subtle way, in an engaging way with communities, and to counter certain messages, if you will, from appropriation of cultures and political messages. And I'm not sure that our students not only have these skills, but have the confidence that they can put themselves out there and take the risk to do creative work that is pushes back at certain elements of cultural imperialism. So I think that the narrative is very important, but so are the making skills, so are understandings of Picasso's Guernica in the context of that, so are understandings of why Andy Warhol's sleep 8 hours long, someone would sit and watch Andy Warhol sleep for 8 hours. And so those sorts of things are being marginalized or eliminated from their understanding. They think that museums and fine arts and exhibits and galleries are places for just fancy people, and they don't have any place there. And to see their place in creative disruption, I think, is a really important part of this, actually, and the uses of media and the understanding of other kinds of media besides broadcast or mainstream media is also important to me.
I'm going to take a crack at this one. It's Canada's 150th anniversary, and one of the things that's happening culturally is a resurgence of Indigenous knowledge. The Indigenous people, who are over 1 million in Canada, are asserting themselves as a growth of there's an empowerment within the young generations, etc. Now, looking at the question of cultural imperialism from the Indigenous perspective, looking at alternative facts from the Indigenous perspective is one where today is nothing new. Nothing has changed. The newspapers never got the story right, historically. So it's an absolute continuity. There is no change at all. But in relation to the picture here, one of the elements of cultural imperialism for the Aboriginal community is most of the things that we value in the humanities. Most of the legacies of print literacy have been experienced as a hegemonic form and a form of cultural imperialism. And the opening that is accorded in this new digital era to reconsider how we communicate, I'm speaking here of Aboriginal people, how Aboriginal people participate is one where they can skip over the terrible legacy of what was done to them through our schooling systems, through the imposition of dominant literacies. So this is, a real ironic take around where we can go with this today.
No, just a reflection about, I think that in a way, this is just for the panel to reflect on all of us, that perhaps what's happening now is just a continuation of what we had before. If you remember how was defined television as the business of selling audiences to the advertisers. So really that internet is not much different than that, just that now they collect the data more efficiently. But then, so in a way, we're continuing in that direction. And the other thing is the question of privacy, and how privacy, it's us all people we're so concerned about. But I'm not sure young people are that concerned, and do they care about? And if you think about the kind of conversations they have in their cell phones, surrounded by people, that we will say, well, this is a private conversation, but now, people just talk and they say things, and etc. So I don't know, concept of privacy, and perhaps, something to reflect about, that the monetarization of data collected through the internet is just a continuation of what's going on already on the old media.
Just to respond to Carlos's question about cultural imperialism, I actually think when you said, yes, it's Canada's 150th anniversary, I'm thinking actually there is a way of reading the history of media education with the idea of cultural imperialism. I think one reason why media education has been quite strong in Canada is partly been a resistance to US cultural imperialism. And in a way you can see the same thing in the UK. So you look at the pioneers of media education, and part of what motivates them is, with all due respect, an anti-Americanism. Yeah? Yeah? It's this sense that, we're being invaded. And of course, in many ways, as English-speaking countries, we are very vulnerable to US cultural imperialism. There's no translation process has to happen. And so, in a way, you could say that question of cultural imperialism has been there right from the beginning, yes, or at least American cultural imperialism. At the same time, the whole issue, and there is obviously a big debate in academic media studies about this, and it's something that encapsulates it for me is there is a famous British media sociologist called Jeremy Tunstall. He's a real old-time, political economy of the media, Marxist. And in the 1970s, he wrote a book called The Media Are American. Yeah? So it was an analysis of global media industries, and the thesis was in the title. In about mid-2000s, so 30 years later, he writes a book, an update of the book, and the book is called The Media Were American, right? And what he's looking at is the shifts within the global media industries towards, and he focuses on things like the development of the Hindi film industry in India, the development of the film industry in, Nigeria, He talks about anime and the rise of Japan as a cultural power. He talks about Al Jazeera. There are many, many instances of much more complicated flows of culture going on. Now, that's not to say there are not still nations or language communities that are disadvantaged in that flow of culture. If you come from a small country, if you come from a marginalized indigenous group, you're still not participating in this market, but the market is more complicated. So I think that's, things have changed, and in a way we need to think about and understand those changes. Having said that, the largest media companies in the world, which for me are Google, Facebook, and actually Apple as well, those are, yes, they're global corporations, but they're US-based global corporations. So in many ways, it's not a cultural imperialism of content so much, just to go back to what we were talking about before, but it's certainly a cultural imperialism of platform and of data collection. Yeah? So Mark Zuckerberg owns a lot of our data. Yep.
Okay, I have to respond to this very quickly.
The Americans are jumping out of their
How's that
skin.
Brexit thing working out for you? Yeah, how's that Brexit working out? I want to talk about these corporations, Google and Twitter and Amazon actually also. First of all, the United States is not one culture. There are some shared cultural values, but it's a very diverse place. And so I would never want to represent it as a one cultural force. But in terms of the business culture, a lot of these tech companies have places in Ireland because they get a tax code. So it's around the tax code, and they do employ people all over the world who buy into their cultural values, and et cetera. But the film industries, I do think, are trending, and China in particular is taking over some new business models for technology. And so to look around, and it's easy because they were pioneered in the United States, but they're all over the world. They have different diverse cultural values, and so I don't want to make it too simplistic, although, like the United States does have huge cultural influence. I don't want to make it too simplistic for us in a business and commercial sense.
And just to piggyback on that, I agree with Kathleen. I always find it interesting, not that when we get thrown under the bus, but we do get thrown under the bus a bit. The United States is huge. I mean, it's interesting to think about when people talk to me about a perspective of what they see about the United States or what they understand, which most of the time is media driven and not in actuality what's happening to us individually in the United States. And certainly, I think, even from the election standpoint, the shock that people felt about the election, I always kind of think, you're not here, so you don't really see what some of us on the ground are seeing, and there was a lot more going on than what was represented in the media, and certainly what was translated across the pond, as they say, from the United States. But I will say this about the cultural imperialism piece, just to add that. When I feel like a young Padawan up here a little bit because I had the great fortune of studying with Barry Duncan, with David Buckingham, and with Kathleen Tyner up here. And one of the things that I learned from Barry Duncan was about the cultural imperialism piece, because when I had gone through his course, he had talked to me a lot about how in Canada, one of the reasons why media education was so valued in Canada was because of the fact that their youth believed a lot of what US media was telling them. And so things like, if you watch a court series like CSI or Law and Order, students believed that the way law was practiced in Canada was very much to the way it was in the United States, which in fact is completely different. It's a whole other system. So in that sense, I think that the idea of media literacy education has tremendous value on various fronts. For the United States, I think for us it's a really global component piece where we really need to use it to understand more of our global connection. On the privacy piece, and I want to connect this to Jordy, what he said about the idea that students don't really care about privacy. They do and they don't, and I will use an example. In the town next door to me, when the students were graduating, the school officials really wanted to talk to students about privacy and understanding that when they graduated, what would happen to them as they moved in college and life if they didn't understand the concept of privacy. And so what they did was they gave the list of names of the graduating class, which was about 120 students, to the local police department. And the local police department's task was to see if they could find out anything about these students online. And they did a presentation at the school, and they were literally able to find pictures, tweets, you name it, and they presented it to the students. And then the students said, "You invaded my privacy," which was fascinating because they'd actually put all this information out there without even thinking about the ideas of privacy. So I think it's a dichotomy in many ways because they want it, but they don't understand it, and they certainly don't see the connection to them in the future.
Just to come straight back on that, under the terms and conditions of most of the platforms, you still retain the rights to the material, but not to broadcast it. So the platforms own the broadcast right to your photographs, videos, or whatever, and increasingly the right to broadcast it is synonymous with the right to own it. And that's the really fine kind of legal point, and that's the way that they are continually evading the issue of actually owning data, because they're just saying, well, we're just a platform. I'm going to go back again, same note as before. Everyday practices are cultural and literacy practices. So when a child has an image taken by a parent, I think these are the sorts of things you start to talk to children about at school. Is that okay? Where did your parents put that picture? Oh, they put it on their Facebook page, did they? Because increasingly, you know, I think it's going to be an issue as children grow up, and lots of kind of embarrassing pictures of, oh, this is the first time they splattered an avocado all over their face when they were 3 months old. You know, who owns that? Does the parent own it? Does the child own it? What rights does the child have to have this image shared? So these are sorts of questions you can ask quite young children, and you can start to layer in this vision of a media text is instantly shareable, ownable, broadcastable by somebody else from quite a young age. It doesn't have to be a problematic of how do we educate our young people about this. Start earlier.
Just to advise the panel, we're being filmed and this is all going on YouTube and streamed on Facebook, so we're giving it away. It's gone. Interventions from the audience. Somebody like to take up one of the issues or raise a question or comment? Yes, please. Okay. Necesita micrófono.
I speak Spanish. Quiero hacer una reflexión en voz alta y compartirla con vosotros. En principio, agradecer que estéis aquí y compartir con nosotros vuestras ideas y el conocimiento. La reflexión que quiero hacer es en relación al discurso que tenemos nosotros los investigadores en este campo. Estoy notando que todavía hablamos en términos de dentro y fuera de la escuela, ¿no? O sea, hay un discurso separado entre qué es lo que está pasando fuera de la escuela y lo que pasa adentro, ¿no? Nuestro discurso no establece aún los puentes y no ha cruzado los, no cruza los espacios.
Muy bien, eso.
Sí,
listo. So, first of all,
voy a continuar. Tengo la impresión que si no comprendemos en profundidad qué está sucediendo en la sociedad en este momento, no vamos a ser capaces como comunidad científica, como comunidad investigadora, de hacer propuestas que realmente transformen de alguna manera la realidad y la educación en el campo mediático, ¿no?
Gracias.
Okay, thank you. That's a really good question. And I think, again, it depends on what your version of literacy is. So literacy is socially constructed and it's situated and it's value-laden. It's not an autonomous force, and we've known this since multiliteracies and before. So we go back to James G., Shirley Bryce Heath, Ways with Words, Anne Haas Dyson. The incorporation of popular culture into children's earliest learning experiences is a way to sort of, kind of break that down. It's more complicated than that. But in a quick answer, I would say that it does boil down to how we value popular culture. Popular culture is media saturated. Do we have those conversations with children when they walk through the door, or do we produce a phonics checklist and a worksheet? So it depends entirely on our vision of literacy, which in turn feeds our vision of pedagogy. What is teaching and learning in this digital media age? And fundamental to that is an understanding that literacy is situated and contingent, and its meaning is not fixed.
That's okay. Just on the idea of the bridge between school and home, I think one of the main pieces really has to do with parent education, which I think is fundamental to all of this. And I think media literacy education we tend to think of more in terms of schools, but I think parents would value from media literacy education as well because of the fact that new media is scary to them. Right now I'm working on a project with Vitor Tomé from Portugal, and in his reflective study that we have been going back and forth on, there is an obvious disconnect in many ways between parent understanding of how media is influencing their children's lives as well as its impact, and then actually seeing the connection between what it can actually do in terms of learning in school. There's a gap. And there's also a technological gap as well, where we, once again, just like students, they use technology in certain ways, parents use it in certain ways too, and because of the age difference, it's used very differently, of course. And also, that plays into, I think, the fear factor that there is just this lack of knowledge in general about how these technologies are influencing their students' lives.
Very quickly, I can try to respond to this. I agree that parental education is important, although as parents, the generations change. A lot of parents have strong digital skills, maybe not media literacy skills, but at least device skills. And they understand that it's not just your phone and it's not just your television, but it's the toys and it's the embedded chips all over your house and those sorts of things. So I think we go back to Freire and learning to read the world, and the world has shifted dramatically. So we're learning to read in school the math and the silos for each discipline as we did in the past, and the world is extended beyond that school door. So I see a lot of, in the United States, I see a lot of informal education spaces, a lot of education going on in camps and nonprofit organizations that engage with these issues through, not only through creation and art, but through math and science, and engage in how we read the world. I do think that for young children, we start with ethics, and we end with ethics, and we tie all of their learning to ethical uses of knowledge and skill completely as a goal, as an ideal. And in the United States, because it's so diverse, we also need a lot more help with cultural competency. Not only the language of talking to different cultures, not only learning different languages, but learning different cultural practices and having the sensitivity and the ethics around those kind of intercultural exchanges. So these sorts of things do connect to reading the world and the way we communicate, not only with devices, but also messages, and also our more aesthetic codes like gestures and artistic practices.
Okay, probably 2 points, really. I mean, on one level, what you're identifying is not a new issue. In a sense, it's always been the issue. It's the relationship between what happens outside school and in school, or I think more specifically, the relation between everyday knowledge, vernacular knowledge, and academic knowledge, which is what we encounter in the school. I think on the one hand, and I would agree with John and others here, you know, we need to value vernacular knowledge. We need to value what it is that kids know and kids can do, that idea of funds of knowledge. Kids bring things to schooling. But also, and in some ways this is more difficult, we need to identify what kids don't know and can't do. We need to identify what is the contribution that the school makes. So how does that interaction between vernacular knowledge and academic knowledge, what does academic knowledge and understanding add? And how does it potentially change the vernacular knowledge? And I think that's, in a sense, that's always been the problem of media education. It's what media education is about. Second point, just briefly, is to say I think there is a danger when we talk about this that we overstate a lot of differences. We overstate, I think, generational differences, and Kathleen touched on that. You know, this idea, and it's the most kind of crass, popular version of this is digital natives and digital immigrants, yes? The idea that somehow kids spontaneously know everything and adults know nothing, yes? I think there is a danger also that we overstate the difference between out of school and in school. So we imagine that everything that happens out of school is about informal learning, and everything that happens in school is about formal learning. We imagine that what happens outside school is free and unconstrained, whereas what happens in school is constrained and potentially repressive. I think the danger is that we can often romanticize what is going on outside school, and we can polarize those differences. I think the real issue is, you know, what's the relationship? How do those things come together? How does academic understanding, which we as teachers are trying to get across, how does it help to reformulate that popular understanding, those popular practices?
I'd like to add something here as well. I mean, I think we have to move beyond talking about children and youth, and we have to get to the specificity of how social structures stratify youth. So we have to bring in discourses of exclusion around race and culture, also gender, but social class. So I just want to say that the vocabulary that we should be putting on the table here also includes la brecha digital, the digital divide, which is not a technological one so much as an educational one, or that common sense ability to just be feel that natural connection to these tools that the people who have a lot of access to them at home come to school already having, which relates then to the question of cultural capital. And you know, the cultural capital takes a new form. And now we can develop that cultural capital in play, but it's certainly present, and I think those are parts of the discussion. So thank you for raising all that. I think we had a question over here.
Hi. Okay. Well, I'm a master's student at the University of Guadalajara in Mexico, and I've been studying media literacy on teenagers, and pretty much of the idea has to do with what David was saying. I think schools as a social institution made for educating are failing on its principal labor, because we're creating citizens for a society that no longer exists. But what I think is amazing and incredible are the autonomous experiences people are having with technology. So to what extent professors and parents and we as researchers are creating strategies and projects that really has to do with the real interest on the students to know media literacy and the use of technology, because, I mean, are we asking if they do even want to be educated when it comes to media and when it comes to technology and when it comes to entertainment? Because I think we're failing on that as researchers.
we're going to just try to clarify your question. Are you basically asking that, are we putting media literacy into teenagers' space when they don't want it there, and how do we get around that, or how researchers are actually participating in that piece, helping to change it? Is that, okay.
I can respond maybe about one small segment of that. I think that we do have an opportunity to do more project-based work in the classroom, and everything, including the school architecture, is a barrier to project-based work. And one of the things that connects out of school and in school is the project-based work, because it's easier to do in a warehouse or in a studio than it is to do in a classroom. So if we do project-based work, not only do we have the opportunity for the generations to talk to each other and from teachers to learn from students and to have dialogue and research about the project and collaborative work. I don't think collaborative work is for every single project, but I think that this kind of collaborative project-based work is an opportunity for the generations to talk across some of these misunderstandings, to share knowledge and skill, and if the teacher has a strong basis for media literacy, to take those topics specifically and apply them to something that's right there in front of them in the project. Maybe.
There's also a deep sense of personal identity that young people bring with their connections to the media, and a tendency to feel under attack if the very media that they are consuming and appreciating and enjoying is that of the discussion in the classroom. This is the moment for the Freirean turn. This is the moment where we have to give over to the young people to define the agenda, and we need to find the grammar and the types of heuristics to help guide young people in their questioning, but we're not there to take the fun out of media. And this is one of the ironies, is that the media is an educating force, and it runs on the principle of fun, whereas schools actually are all about draining fun out of learning. So.
Well, they are at the moment, perhaps, with PISA and various other meaningless kind of league tables and so forth. But what I would say is that maybe we're thinking about things a little bit wrongly in a way, because as the institutions change, the artifacts and texts and practices change around them, why shouldn't school and educational foci change as well? So why should we interfere, I take your point, with what children and young people are doing in that sense? But there are other things that they need from a school. They need still to know how to live with each other in the same world. They need to understand what's happening to the data, and they need to understand the institutions that encircle them. David has talked a lot about as well. So I think that, yeah, we probably need to shift the nature of the program. Why should we be talking about skills? We should maybe be thinking about dispositions towards production. What happens when you make something? Where does it go? Those are things that perhaps young people may not know some of that stuff. And so that could be where our attention needs to be focused. What happens next? I've written a lot about this idea of curation. You know, people can curate their a video of themselves and so forth. But the darker side of all of this, the less celebratory side, is having a theoretical and an educational understanding of what happens next. What happens to that image? What happens to that message that you've sent to the world? This is perhaps where people need to sit alongside children and young people, reposition themselves as teachers, and learn a little too, perhaps, themselves about this.
I'm afraid I don't buy the argument that the school is failing or the school is is always repressive. And I'm sorry, I think if we take that argument, then where do we go with that? Schools are not going to disappear.
Yeah.
Yes, despite a lot of the enthusiasm of technology advocates, school is not going to disappear. So we have to think hard about what the school does as an institution. What is the function of public schooling as an institution? And I think, as we've said, it's partly about how we learn to live together. But I would also say I think it's about access to powerful knowledge. Yes, and I think that's really important. And we're all sitting here, you know, we're all teachers, we're professors, we're you know, we've all got postgraduate qualifications. Yes, we have had access to powerful knowledge that has changed the way we think. It's given us power and understanding in the world, and I don't think we can give up on that. And maybe I'm just being kind of old-fashioned and modernist about it, but I think we have to work with the school as an institution, because it's where kids spend an enormous amount of time, apart from anything else.
Yeah, and can I underline that? That's really what I believe as well, is that the criticality that you can gain and the way that you speak to each other, how you address each other and how you relate to each other is probably more the function of the school in the future, not less. So we need more of a responsive schooling that is responsive to the dynamic literacies there, but schools are absolutely critical, key components of the whole process, and they're not to be devalued in any way.
Just to add to that piece, I think the only thing that I think structurally I see is that we need more self-directed learning from the student's point of view. We don't see a lot of that going on in schools, especially in the United States. A lot of it is very top-down, very top-driven. And I think that's where we need to switch that role so that students feel empowered to actually show us their own capabilities, their own learnings, what their knowledge base is, and then move from there. And I think that's where project-based learning is incredibly important in schools.
Connect this a little bit to your original point about diversity, and I totally agree that schools are not going to go away, although they are being privatized, and they're going to change dramatically, whether we like it or not. But they are also a place for the communities to come together. However, I do have to question, what do we mean by powerful knowledge? Powerful knowledge that is considered important by the people in power, for example. And so I think this is a problem with literacy over the ages. People are taught the literacy of power. And what we have to do in a diverse society is to teach them to code switch between their own dialects and their own communities' understanding of power and importance, of cultural importance, to the mainstream understanding of power and cultural importance. And there's a phrase that's often used related to this about how do we integrate dialects? Do we tell people that they're not speaking properly, that they should speak this way, they should speak that way? And so the phrase that's used in scholarship is literacy is a dialect with an army.
Almost out of time. We might have room for a very brief intervention, but if it's too good a question, it's going to spark yet another long debate here. But let's see how we go. This person here.
Maria from the University of Florence. Actually, I don't have a question, but just some comments to go back to the relationship between media literacy education and social media, for example. I think that there are two sides which matter us. From one point of view, we have to do with text again, because we are defined as prosumer more and more. And so I think that this asks us to reflect on the notion of creativity. We need deeper reflection on it. Could we be creative without being critical? This is my point. So we need to reflect on creativity from this point of view. And also in terms of platform, I think that we need to reflect not only on the economic side, but also on the technological side. Maybe we have to teach students to get more and more control over technology. So I think that school and its function for the future is also to reflect on open source technology. This is my point.
But as a final reflection, I mean, we're in a position now where it's being put on us to be teachers of technology. And this is a very uncomfortable place to be, you know, to suddenly have to have mastery over every tool. And what's happening is this democratization of expertise. So this is playing a role in a whole number of places. In fact, we could add that to the alternative facts conversation, but just specifically about media education and the way I'm experiencing it, the colleagues increasingly know something about something, and they think that's enough to be teachers of technology, to be teachers of media, And there's something around this background and training in media literacy that's now being devalued within the institution, at least where I teach. I can't quite get my head around the fact that everybody knows something, and that whatever it is that we've been talking about, they're just not interested in listening. Any final word? Final words?
Do you want to start? Shall I? Okay.
All right, we have time for one intervention.
I'm coming from Cameroon. When I have one little question. Today, when we are speaking about technology, about digital, we have a vision, a global vision. So today, we are speaking about Europe, United States, but we are not speaking about Africa, about developing countries, where people are living in what we call today digital divide. And I want to know how we can empower teachers who are afraid of introducing digital education, media education in the education. I want to know how we can empower them, because they are afraid of introducing this education in their context.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that question. It's a really important one, and you're right, we haven't really addressed it. First of all, in the developing world, there are interventions being made on behalf of quite large corporations who are trying to map the way that things work in other countries onto the local situation. So providing templates and computers and so forth in areas where there is no electricity and sometimes a long way to go to get water. So first of all, we need to involve and empower the local communities to be involved in this. What kinds of technologies map onto the kinds of cultural experiences and everyday practices? Lighter, leaner, mobile technologies perhaps, but ways of doing things that do not foist solutions which will not work on those kinds of contexts, but to empower other kinds of solutions. And it means creating a whole a whole sort of policy that's driven from the ground up, not arriving with a crate full of computers that you can't plug in anywhere.
I think that the first step is to ask the people who live there what they need, because that doesn't happen often enough.
Okay, and just to go back to the cultural imperialism question, there is we're all sitting here. I think this panel was called something about Anglo-Saxons. Yes, I don't really see myself as an Anglo-Saxon, but nevertheless, the big problem is we don't only have a cultural imperialism of media, potentially we have a cultural imperialism of media education, yes, where we have all the answers already and we tell you guys, yeah? So I think what we're saying is, certainly when you look at Africa, or you look at Latin America, or you look at, there are actually indigenous approaches to media education. There are very different kind of needs, very different concepts, very different ideas of schooling and what schooling is about. And actually, if we're going to do anything, those are the things that need to come out and be talked about. Yeah.
I was just going to say, in the end, I think what we're talking about is cultural representation, and that we need to understand what is actually happening from the ground up, which is what John had said, but really just this idea of who we are as a culture and the fallacy of how media interprets that, and we need to be aware of that wherever we go.
So, thank you, everyone. Tenemos que seguir en estas preguntas, esas líneas, y la verdad es que se necesita reemplazar el panel por gente que tienen otra experiencia, que no son parte de este mundo de anglofilia, ¿no? De una obsesión entre sí, y es una comunidad que no ve muy bien el exterior. But yeah, just as a final word, I'm not going to share with you what I just said in Spanish, but I was just, actually, the one little part is that, you know, the question actually provokes the follow-up, which is that our panel should be replaced, you know, that we need some other characters with other cultural experiences to come up. Yeah, and that really is where we need to go next. So thank you for the quality of questions. It certainly has raised the temperature up here. We had some very interesting discussion. Thank you, John. Thank you, Belina. Thank you, Kathleen, David. Muchas gracias a todo el mundo.